Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're here at the Document Capture Partner Training Program. My name is Jamal Robinson. Thank you for joining us today. To recap from our last call, we did an introduction and foundation to document capture where we discussed the activities and considerations that you as a partner need to have internally and with your client in order to properly start a continued document capture implementation on the right foot. So we talked about those pre-kickoff requirements. We showed you where to go to install and activate document capture. We talked about what document categories are, the available document categories that your client can take advantage of when they install and activate document capture in their sandbox. And then we talked about some of the initial basic considerations and configurations of document capture. I also want to discuss some housekeeping um, things with you all. If you have a question during the session, you're not able to raise any questions or talk during the call. And I'm not really going to have time to answer questions in real time during our sessions just because, there's a lot of material to cover. And I want to make sure that I'm respectful of your time to make sure that we can complete what we need to complete within the 2 hours. So that's why in the beginning I mentioned that we have a Q&A tab inside of the Zoom meeting. So if you have any questions about anything that I'm covering during the session, please utilize the Q&A tab. And like you've seen yesterday, I will be sending out emails with the recordings, and I will attempt to answer some of those questions in that recap email if they're able to be answered via email. If we have time for those particular questions that may require a demonstration, then I would take the beginning of the call for the next session to maybe answer a question or two that may require demonstration based on the questions that you may have from the Q&A tab. Please utilize the Q&A tab if there's a question, if you need me to cover something differently, or if you need me to cover a concept again. Um, we are asking for feedback, so thank you for those who are giving feedback. We want to improve and make these sessions more worthwhile for you. And at the end of the program, we will be sending out surveys. So apart from the feedback that you'll receive after every session, if you have any feedback, we'll also be sending out a survey at the end of the program where we hope to get your thoughts and more feedback as well. So we are trying to check, if we're doing a good job and servicing you properly throughout the program. I know it's November, the holiday season is coming up. So Thanksgiving is right around the corner. We will not have any sessions during the week of Thanksgiving. So we will take a pause the week of Thanksgiving and then resume the next week. So we only have 3 more weeks to go. So we'll have 2 more weeks. We'll take a break for a week for the Thanksgiving holiday, and then we'll resume the next week to finish out the training. Okay. So we're here at our next session where we want to talk about processing documents. So we're going to understand the initial configuration of document capture. So not only do you need to install and activate it and do those document capture setups, we do want to configure the solution in a way to account for the majority of your clients' incoming vendor invoices. If you remember, inside of the document category for purchase, because we're building purchase invoices, there's a master template. So the master template will be the basis for all future templates. So we're going to go through the master template today so you can fully understand the different fields that are at your disposal And we want to go through the master template to make sure that we're configuring it in a way that your client is best set up to handle the majority of their documents. Um, we'll show you how to import a document, and then I'll take you through what the document journal is and some fields within the document journal that would prove useful for you and the client. And then we'll also talk about how do we identify vendors in the system. So this is the most important. The first thing that I see that clients and partners struggle with is making sure that when you import a document into the system, that we're finding the right vendor for your clients' needs and building the appropriate template for that vendor. So we'll take you through vendor identification. So I'm going to go into BC. So here we are in BC. And if you remember, we had that page document categories. So we search for document categories. These are the available document categories. When you install and activate Continia Document Capture, these are the out-of-the-box document categories that they can take advantage of. We're going to focus primarily on the purchase document category because we want to build purchase invoices and credit memos. I want to revisit that custom document category that we created in our last call, just to complete the thought and show you how it would work in practice. So if you remember, we created this document category as a copy of one of our existing document categories. We copied the vendor document category. The vendor document category is used to import, scan, and attach a document to an existing record inside of Business Central. For the vendors, it was the vendor card or the vendor list. So if we open up the custom document category that we created for sales invoices, you can see that we have a unique email, and the source table for this document category was the sales invoice header, because the purpose of this document category, the way that we created it, was to import and scan in a supplemental document to attach to a posted sales invoice. And we're doing that by adding the source table, because we're going to look at the sales invoice header table to identify that sales invoice. And we're going to use it through what is known as identification fields. The identification fields are criteria within the source table that we're searching for and trying to make matches to based on information that we're capturing from the document. We're scanning that document as it comes in. We're looking for this information and we're trying to make matches to it from that source table. And our identification fields for this document category was the number or the posted sales invoice number. And then this was the bill to name of the posted sales invoice as well. So we're using the bill to name and the number in BC to make that match to that post sales invoice record. And nothing really going on. There's no templates associated. We have the base code units that was a copy of the vendor document category. So you see that we've sent in some documents to that email. If you open up the two, you can see I've emailed 2 documents into this document category. So if I just import each file individually, just click import file. Now we have 2 documents that are now ready to be registered. So if I go to the 2, you can see that using those identification fields, we are making a match to an existing posted sales invoice in the system, and we're matching it to the name of that customer for that posted sales invoice. So you can see there's no template associated. We used those identification fields to find the record based on the information on the document. You can see this is a sales confirmation. Here's the number that we found from the document to make it match to the existing record inside of BC. The document is marked as okay. Once the document is marked as okay, you can then register the document. So I'm going to register this document because it's matched to the posted sales invoice. And then this is also matched to the posted sales invoice for this customer. So I'll just register because it's marked as okay. So now those documents are registered. Now, if I go back to the posted sales invoices list, go to posted sales invoices. So here's those posted sales invoices. And if we find that record in BC, you can see here's that record and here's that document that we sent in to the document category that is now attached at existing record. If we go to the next invoice that we matched it to, here's that other invoice that we sent in from the document category that matched to the existing posted invoices record, and it attached that document to that record. You can go to the card. You can see that we have one document capture attachment, and you can pull it up. And here's that attachment, and we can view that attachment. Here's the attachment that was brought in from Continia. Okay. So if you have a use case for it, you are able to copy existing document categories, change the source tables, look at another type of record in BC, and potentially use that document category to automate the process of bringing in those records and attaching it to those records. Right? So we're going to focus on the purchase document category. And if we edit the purchase document category, you can see that this is different, right? This is a different source table than the sales invoices. We're looking up to the vendor table because we want to identify a vendor in this. We talked about customizable columns, and there's a field here to show the default value. So if inside of the Business Central environment, you've set up some default dimensions, or maybe you set up default purchaser codes on the vendor card, you can toggle this setting in the document category, and we will show you what the default value of that particular field is within Business Central. And if you trust the default value, you can just leave it the default value and let Business Central handle it, and let Business Central bring in that default value when we build the purchase invoice. Or if you want to overwrite the default value, you can instead capture it from the document within the template. But you can toggle this on if you would like the template to show you what the default value, if it exists, what is that default value inside of Business Central for a particular field. We talked about that notification email address. So within your client's organization, if there's an individual who wants to be notified, if there's any OCR issues, if a document is unable to be processed, you can add an email address who can receive a notification if the OCR runs into an error status. Here we have those customizable columns. If you remember from last session, you can add a customizable column, and this will look at the data that we're capturing in the template, and it will bring forward that value in the template, and it allows you to manage documents based on the values that you're capturing in the templates. So if you ever want to filter or sort documents based on one of these customizable columns, you can add them here. So I'm going to add some customizable columns. I'm going to add the due date, and I'm going to add a number custom column for our amount including tax, our grand total. So we have the amount excluding tax, which is our subtotal, and then we have the amount including tax, which is our grand total. So I'm going to add a customizable column for our grand total amount including tax. So right now I've told the template, hey, when we go to the document journal, I want a customizable column that shows the due date that we're capturing and what that grand total is that we're capturing in the document, so that, as I build templates, maybe I want to sort and only focus on the documents where the grand total is over a certain amount. Or maybe I want to sort my documents and only work with the documents where the due date is coming up. So I want to sort documents by due date. So that's what customizable columns are doing. Here's our template list. So right now we have, 4 templates in the system, but we want to focus on the master template because like I said, the master template is the base that all future vendor templates are going to be based out of. So we want to edit the master template and we want to go through the master template to make sure that for one, we review the settings and make sure the settings are correct. And we want to go through our template fields and expose and configure the fields that we know that your client is always going to use for the majority of every vendor invoice that they import and use Continia with. Not all fields may not need to be exposed for every template. So maybe you want to take off a particular field from the master and only add it to the individual vendor templates where it's necessary. So we want to make the master template broad enough to account for the majority of their invoice situations. So, we'll go through these particular template fields in more detail when we get into configuring templates. Of note here, um, you could configure this to say, hey, when we register the document, we want you to show the document after we register on that open purchase invoice. So you can say, always or never or ask. Here's an automation that eventually we would hope that your client implements to register documents automatically. So once you've completely set up a template, once it's working properly, if there's no errors, if there's no warnings on the template, you can turn on register documents automatically. And upon the import of a future document, if the document is marked as okay, they'll turn on register documents automatically. Usually this is on a per individual template level. We probably don't want to put this on the master template. Maybe for a particular vendor, we know that, hey, this vendor is completely set up. We're comfortable registering these vendors' documents automatically upon import. We don't need to see it in the document journal. We'll talk about these settings when we talk about recognizing lines and creating a template with lines. But this is a good setting if internally in BC, if you have items and you're using items and inside of your vendor documents, when they import documents, if the vendor is using Business Central item numbers on their documents, you can turn on this setting that says the vendor uses our item numbers, and this will do an automatic cross-reference translation because the item numbers are the same between what's incoming from the vendor document and what exists in BC. So this is good if your client is using items, if they're using those cross-reference tables, and if the vendor is sending in what the items are inside of BC, you can turn this setting on and we'll do that automatic translation based on the cross-references. And that would be able to save you some time when configuring line detail and those templates. We know, so we get into the registration aspects of the template. We know when we register a document, we're going to create an invoice. So that's the standard setting. Most times, if you're matching to a purchase order, you want to match to the purchase order and create an invoice. So for those situations where your client is matching to a purchase order inside of the individual vendor template, you want to change registration step 1 to say not only do we want to create the invoice, but we also want to match to a purchase order and create an invoice. These are the 2 most used settings for invoice registration step 1. And then you can also put in some automations on invoice registration step 2 to say, not only do we want to create the invoice, but we may want to auto submit for approval. Or we don't care about an approval process. We want to auto release the document when we register. Or maybe we just want to auto post the document after we register. So there's some automations that you can put on invoice registration step 2 as well. If you're configuring a template and you're doing a posting setup for item charges, you have the ability to assign those item charges automatically, either equally by amount, weight, or volume. So you can put this setting in the template if you're configuring a template and within that template's posting setup, you have a posting setup that is going towards an item charge. If you don't want to assign those item charges manually, the template can do it automatically with this setting, but this will also have to have items on the template and coding it to an item as well. You can change the posting date to say, hey, we're going to use the document date or the invoice date that we're recognizing on the document. You can use today's date, you can use the work date, or what the date is from purchase and payable setup. So you can change what we use for the posting date in the template, or when you post the documents, if you're using the batch posting function inside of BC, you can also change the posting date during the batch posting process, which is a function in BC. We'll talk about this in our future session when we talk about matching, but here's some matching settings, and you only need to configure these settings when you need to match. So now we're going to go towards our template fields. And we want to go through these template fields and only expose and go through the fields that are needed for your client. So we have the numbering series. By default, it is not inserted on new templates. Sometimes I see clients create a unique numbering series only for Continia documents. So you might want to create your own numbering series specifically for Continia documents. In that case, you might need to expose the numbering series to make sure that we're capturing the appropriate numbering series that you want to create those purchase invoices for. A little bit about the numbering series. When you create the numbering series inside of BC, let's say you create a new numbering series specifically for Continia, you have to make sure that you're doing relationships between not only the Continia numbering series, but the standard numbering series for purchase invoices. So if you create a unique numbering series only for Continia documents, you need to create a relationship between the unique Continia numbering series and the standard BC purchase invoice numbering series. So that's a aspect that sometimes partners forget, that they have to do a relationship between a unique numbering series and the standard numbering series for purchase invoices. We have the invoice number. So that's a required field here. And we always want to make sure that we're inserting that field on every vendor template. We have invoice date, due date. This field, our contacts field, this field looks up to the salesperson purchaser code table. We use the our contact field to identify the first level of approval for that particular template. So if we click into this, we're doing this in code, right? So it's not like it's a lookup field and it's looking up to the salesperson purchaser code table. This is a standard system field within Continia, and it's already doing that code by looking up to the salesperson purchaser code table. And we want to identify that purchaser code to identify the first level of approval using the standard approval method in BC with a purchaser code and an approval amount limit. If, for example, your client always uses the same first level of approval for a particular vendor, you can do a couple of things. You can default in that purchaser code from the vendor card. So within the vendor card in BC, you can create a default purchaser code for the vendor. And then in that case, you don't need to capture our contact at all, because when you build the invoice, BC will fill in the gaps and bring in that default purchaser code from the vendor. That's why it's important that maybe if you go back to that show default field value, if there exists a default purchaser code, you would see it on the our contact field because it's looking up to the salesperson purchaser code table. Another thing that you can do, if a particular vendor, if a particular template always has the same purchaser code, we can just hard code that value into the formula field. So the formula field is used to not only build template fields or calculate number fields and sort of build calculations through our number fields. The formula field is also used to hard code data into the template and sort of default data into it. So let's say there's a particular purchaser code that your client wants to implement that always gets applied to a particular template. Within that particular template for that particular vendor, you can just go to the our contact field and hard code the value of the purchaser code. So you can say, hey, for this particular template, for this field, the our contact or purchaser code is always going to be this code. And you can hard code that value to the formula field. So formulas are used to calculate fields and concatenate text fields together. And it's also used to hard code values into a template field. So that's the our contact field is used for the standard approval method. But we also have another type of approval method called approval flow codes. So this is another type of method that you can use within Continia, and we'll discuss that when we have our session about the approval options within document capture. But approval flows, what you need to know, approval flows supersede the purchaser code. So if there exists a purchaser code on an invoice and there also exists an approval flow code, the approval flow code overwrites the purchaser code. So if both of these exist on the same document, we will use the approval flow code instead of the purchaser code. We have the our order number. The our order number field, this is your Business Central purchase order number. So if you're matching to a purchase order in the system, we need to identify the Business Central purchase order number in the our order number field. And we'll capture that. We'll configure the template with our matching settings, and we will attempt to match the purchase orders that way. So this is the Business Central PO number. You can also match based on the vendor shipment number or the vendor order number. So these are three different types of fields on the purchase order card in BC, and you can use either three of these fields if your client enters these fields in their purchase orders. You can use either one of these three fields to match. So the BC order number, the vendor shipment number, or the vendor order number could be used to match to purchase orders. We have projects. If you're using projects, here's your dimensions in the system. So out of the box, we will create some dimensions for you. If you have any shortcut dimensions, you might need to build your own shortcut dimension. And I'll show you how we would build a shortcut dimension in a future session. So the first question you want to ask yourself and the client when you're configuring the master template is if your client creates invoices in multiple currencies. Most times for US clients, they may not process any invoices in multiple currencies. Every invoice that they receive will always be in US dollars. So there might not be a reason to expose the currency code to every vendor template. As you can see, it's inserting on every new template. But if your client doesn't process multiple currencies, there's no reason to expose a currency code. Inside of BC, a blank currency code means your local currency in the environment. For US clients, most times it's USD. So what you can do as a partner is go into the field by clicking the hyperlink. And what you would do is uncheck insert on new templates because you do not want this field exposed on every template. So we're going to uncheck insert on the templates. Next, we have the amount excluding tax. This is our most important field. This is the field that gets posted to the ledgers. So this is driving the posting setup. So if you're matching to a purchase order, this is the amount that you need to match. The sum of your purchase order lines must match your amount excluding tax. If you're capturing line detail, the sum of your lines must equal your amount excluding tax. So consider the amount excluding tax field as your subtotal. And then we have these additional amount fields. We use these additional amount fields to capture different amounts. Maybe there's a delivery charge. Maybe there's a service charge. Maybe there's a freight charge. So this is a charge that is outside of the subtotal, a secondary charge that may be on the invoice. So we want to go into this field. As you can see, this is just a number field, but we need to go down to the purchase section. So the purchase section says, hey, if we capture a value in this field, what do you want us to do to that amount in the resulting document? For these additional amount fields, what I train and I suggest that partners and clients do is we need to change this setting to say we always want to transfer this amount to the document. Because think about it. Let's say that there's a delivery charge on the document. That delivery charge is going to have its own unique hosting setup. Maybe there's a delivery charge GL. Maybe there's a freight charge GL that you need to code this additional amount to. So we always want to transfer this amount to the purchase invoice as a new purchase invoice line so that it has its own posting setup. So when you're doing this initial configuration, you want to go to your additional amount fields and change the setting transfer amount to document to be always. And we want to do that to all of our additional amount fields. Because if we capture an amount, we want to create a new purchase invoice line so that it has its own posting setup. And as you can see, we've created a freight amount field out of the box for you just because, most clients do have a need to capture freight. And as you can see, freight is set up the same way. If we capture a value in this freight amount field, we always want to transfer this amount to the document as a new purchase invoice line so that it creates a posting setup for that amount. So that's our amount fields. The next field for consideration that you need to think about and have your client confirm is how does the environment handle tax inside of BC? We've exposed two different tax fields to the master template, but you don't need both of these fields exposed to every single one of your client's template. Each depends on how the environment is set up. We have the tax amount BC field. The tax amount BC field will be used if Business Central is doing an automatic tax calculation. So if vendors are tax liable, if you are identifying a tax area code and a tax group code, and the combination of these creates tax details, and that Business Central is doing a system tax calculation, then you need to expose and use the tax amount BC field because this field is going to confirm, did Business Central calculate the appropriate tax based on the tax that we're capturing from the document? So you would capture the tax from the document in the tax amount BC field, and it's going to be used to confirm, Did Business Central calculate the appropriate tax based on what you've imported, based on tax liable, tax area code, tax group code? So this is used to just confirm that BC did its job. The tax amount GL field will be used if Business Central is not doing any sort of tax calculation, but your client still wants to capture tax and maybe they want to code it to a tax GL account. Maybe your client does care about capturing tax. Maybe they do have an account in the system for like sales tax liable and they do want to capture it, but Business Central is not doing any sort of tax calculation and you're going to code it to a GL account. So you need to confirm how your client's environment is set up because that determines which tax field you need to expose for your client if they even care about capturing tax. Maybe your client doesn't care about capturing tax at all, and you can just remove these fields by going into the field and just unchecking insert on new templates because we don't want this field exposed on every template. So we never suggest to delete fields. If you want to remove it, just go to the master template and uncheck insert on new templates so that it's not exposed. I am going to leave the tax amount GL field because, let's say we do care about capturing tax. We want to code it to a GL account. Then we have our grand total or our amount including tax. So this is the sum of your amount excluding tax fields, any additional amount fields, and the tax fields. So this is going to confirm, do all of our amounts add up correctly based on what we're capturing from the document. So I see partners run into errors, clients run into errors that says amounts do not match. Most likely, if you're capturing header information, that error amounts do not match means amount excluding tax plus your amount fields, any tax fields do not equal your amount including tax. So we're confirming that the calculations total and equal each other. So that's amount including tax. We have these two fields called account type and account number. So when you're configuring the posting setup or a template at the header level, right? We know if we're capturing line detail, the posting setup will be driven by the individual lines. So that's different. Line capture is different. The posting setup is coming from the individual lines. But let's say we're only capturing header information. Let's say we capture a total amount and it's getting coded to one GL account. By default, we're going to set up the template to have a consistent, repeatable posting setup. We capture an amount and it's always going to be coded to the same account. But let's say at the header level, your client may say that the posting setup is dynamic. Maybe based on information from the document, you might need to route it to a different type of account that is not consistent and is not repeatable at the header level. So you might need to expose account type and account number to the header of the template. These two fields are used if you are dynamically routing the header amount to different GL accounts based on information that you're capturing from the document. So you only need to expose these two fields to the template if that's the case. And I'll take you through an exercise where we might need to expose it and we might need to code it and use it in practice. I'll take you through an example. But remember, you only need to expose these two fields to the header of the template if at the header level, the posting setup is dynamic. If it's consistent and repeatable, you do not need to expose these two. The posting setup is driven on the back end with just the normal template settings, and we'll show you both ways to do that later. Next for consideration is the posting setups, right? So we have the header posting setup, which is that header field posting description. on the purchase invoice card. So, by default, BC is going to give you a default posting description that says, INV such and such for the document number for posting description. If your client wants a unique posting description at the header level of the purchase invoice card, you can expose the header posting description field. But then we have the line posting description field. The line posting description field, this is what gets posted to the ledgers. So by default, BC is going to use the default chart of accounts description. Let's say you have an account called office supplies, right? So by default, when you build the invoice, the line is going to have the description office supplies, which is the chart of accounts default description. If your client wants to create a unique description, maybe a custom description taken directly from the document, we would utilize the line posting description field because this will overwrite the default chart of accounts description. So let's say they want a custom description that says paper, pens, and pencils. We would then capture that description in the line posting description field. We have other description fields. So we have description 2 and description 3. We use these fields to build unique descriptions. So let's say, you can't capture the description normally, based off of one description. Maybe you need to concatenate and add multiple descriptions together. You would go into the line posted description field. And remember, we had that formula field. So, like I said, the formula field could be used to calculate fields, like for number fields. If you want to add amounts together, you would use the formula field. The formula field could be used to hard code data and default in data into a particular field. The formula field can also be used to concatenate multiple fields together to build unique fields. So let's say for a particular template within the line posting description field, you can create a formula to say, hey, I've exposed description 2. So I'm going to take description 2 and then I'm going to add the other text that I captured in description 3. So this is concatenating two fields together to build a unique description field. So you might need to expose multiple text fields because it's just a text field, capture information from the document, and then use the formula to build into your line posting description field. So we also use formulas that way. So sometimes we use the description fields to help build other fields. And then finally, we have at the header level, this field where we want to identify the document type. So inside of the purchase document category, we're trying to identify the document as either an invoice, the memo, or prepayment invoice. And we do that different ways. We do that by using a set of rules. So if you go into the rules, you see that, hey, if we identify a C, you know that it's a credit memo. If we identify an I, you know that it's an invoice. And if we identify a P, you know it's a prepayment. And we do that and identify it through these default captions. So we're scanning and reviewing the invoice when you import it, and we're looking for these keywords to help us identify the document. So if we see the word credit memo on the document, we're identifying it as a C for credit memo. If we're identifying the word invoice on the document, we know that's I for an invoice. Statement means I for statement. Credit note means C for credit memo. So we have all of these default captions for different languages. So sometimes I see partners and clients run into errors that say, hey, we don't know how to identify the document type. It's because we scanned the document and we don't see one of these relevant captions that help us identify the document type. In that case, you would just add a new line and add a caption that may appear on your document. So we would say something like, all right, maybe I for invoice means if you see the word account, So you're scanning the page. If you find the word account on the page, we know it's I for an invoice. So if you come into errors and it's mentioning this field, is most likely because it didn't find the appropriate caption that allows us to identify based on the rules for which document type we might think that it is on that incoming invoice. So that's how you would correct that error for document type. Next, we get into the line fields. So we want to go through the line fields and only expose and configure the fields for our client. So we have the number field. This is the vendor reference number. So most times this is used if your client is using items. So if your client is using items, the vendor sends in an item number. It might be a reference number. So we capture that reference number inside of the number field. So if a good practice to get into is if you're starting off an implementation, if your client heavily uses items, maybe it will be a good activity to see if your client can get like a reference list from your clients and from their vendors that you can preload your items table with those cross references from those particular vendors. Because if those cross references exist, we'll do that automatic translation so you don't have to do it yourself when you're capturing information from the document. Remember that setting, vendor uses own item numbers, right? So, um, you know, help the client, if that's possible, build out your cross-reference tables for your clients, for your vendors, so that you can, hopefully make the system a little bit automatic. But if your client does not use items at all, maybe your client never uses items. Maybe it'll be worthwhile to go to the number field and uncheck making it a required field. So this really comes into play when you're capturing lines. And I'll talk about it again when we get into our line session. But when you're capturing lines, if a required field has a blank value, it will invalidate the line. So you wouldn't be able to capture a line if a particular field is required and you're not capturing data in that field. So because number field is required by default, most partners, most clients don't remember or don't look out for this required flag, and they're trying to capture lines, but they're not capturing a vendor reference number, and they're not able to capture lines. And they're like, why can't I capture lines? I'm not using a vendor reference number. It's because it's a required field. And if you're not capturing data in a required field, it's going to remove the line and invalidate the line. So you would have to make the number field not required before you're able to properly capture lines. So if your client is never using items or has no need for the vendor reference number field, maybe go into the template and make this field not required. Okay. We have description. That's self-explanatory. That's if you want to overwrite the default description of the chart of accounts, similar to the line posting description field. You're building lines, you capture a unique description at the line level. Same thing, our order number. You don't need to expose and use the our order number field at the line level. The only time you need to do it is if there's multiple orders that you want to match to at the line level. So let's say each particular line depends on a particular purchase order that it matches to, then you definitely need to expose the BC order number at the lines so that we're capturing the lines so we know that, all right, this line matches this order number, the next line matches to the next order number. Quantity is a required field. We need quantity and unit cost to build a valid line in BC. So that's why we always want to insert it on new templates. But you want to have a conversation about these discount amounts and percentages. Does your client capture discount amount and discount percentage at the line level? That means it has to exist at the lines on those documents for them to capture it. So maybe we want to go into this field and uncheck insert on new templates because there are no discounts at the line level. We don't want to confuse the client with unnecessary fields. Most times for US clients, I see them, if they are using a discount, it's mostly driven through the payment terms on the vendor card. If they process and pay a particular vendor within a certain period of time based on the payment terms, the discount is applied using standard BC. Most times I do not see clients use discount percentage and discount amount at the line level. So most times in implementations, we're just unchecking insert on new templates because we don't need it exposed on every single vendor template that gets created from the master. Maybe we do need to add it on those particular vendor templates that it appears on, right? So remember, we're going through the master template to create setups for the majority of the situations that your client may encounter. And then we have line amount. That's important. And that's about it for the master template. So this activity of going through the master template, going through each template field is what you need to do as a partner before you start bringing in documents, before you start creating templates, before you even introduce the client to the environment. We want to go through the master template and configure it in a way to make sure that we're satisfying the majority of your client's vendor situations. Okay, so I'm going to launch a poll. So I'm launching a poll. It says, which type of fields can you create formulas for? So the potential answers are number fields, text fields, lookup fields, or all of the above. Okay. So the question was, which type of fields can you create formulas for? Number fields, text fields, lookup fields, or all of the above? The answer was all of the above. Because remember, formulas definitely on number fields because, it's used to calculate number fields together. So if you ever wanted to add fields, subtract fields from each other, definitely on number fields, you can use a formula. Remember, on those text fields, the formula is used to build and concatenate text fields together. Let's say you want to build a unique description. Like I showed you, you use the formula field to add and concatenate two text fields together. So you can definitely use text fields for that. And then lookup fields, remember I showed you, you can use the formula field to default in and hard code a value to say, hey, for this particular field, I always want it to say this. So that's why you use the formula within the template field to hard code a value for that field. Okay. So we're going to pause here. Let's take a short break. It's 12 o'clock. Um, let's come back in 3 minutes. So let's take a 3-minute break at 12:03. Okay, we're back. So there was some information in the chat and also in the Q&A that I just want to discuss real quick. These templates. So while you're a part of the program, I highly suggest that you practice on your own inside of Partner Zone. You could create your own demo portal. So if you're logged into Partner Zone, so I'm here at Partner Zone. So you can go, once you're logged in, you can go to Help Center and then Demo Portal, and you can spin up your own demo portal. So in that demo portal, we, have some sample data and some sample examples, some sample invoices. So I highly suggest that, while you're practicing and taking what you've learned on the calls, spin up a demo environment within your Continia Partner Zone and do some testing there. So that is where I suggest that you create template and test to check your knowledge and understanding. And then in the Q&A tab, there was someone that says, is there any sort of situation where you would want to remove a field from the master template, and I would not suggest that you completely delete fields from the master template. You never know if um, your client may have a use for it in the future. Some of these fields are system created fields that might be hard to recreate because there's underlying code that Continia created to build that field in BC. So if you don't want to use it, I would just uncheck insert on new templates from the master. I do not suggest that you completely delete fields from the master template because it might be really hard to bring that back if your client ever has a need for it. So please remember, the chat is not there for questions. You would want to use the Q&A tab inside of the Zoom meeting. But we're back at the document categories. We have an email, and I've imported some documents into the document category. So I'm just going to import these files. And right now we have 9 documents that are ready to be registered. So these are the documents that are ready to be registered. And we're now in what is known as the document journal. The document journal is where documents have been imported and they're waiting for templates to be created, for the client to do the template mapping and create that repeatable process to pick up the right information and handle a particular vendor that comes in. So we haven't created any invoices yet. You just see a list of the different documents that came into the system. So we're trying to identify a vendor, and we're trying to assign a template to these documents that gets imported. Here, we have what is known as a document status code. So this is something that you can create within the document journal if your client wants to manage documents and create their own unique document status codes. So I've created some myself in this environment, one for header examples, one for line examples, purchase order examples. So you'll start to see that I'll assign different statuses to the different documents that get brought in. Your client can create any sort of different statuses for that particular documents to manage their documents. It's just a page inside of BC called document status codes. And once you start to create this list, you'll see this new column in the document journal that you're able to add to particular documents. Here on the right, you also see those customizable columns that I've added to the document category. So as your client starts to create examples and starts to bring in values, you'll see that this will start to populate based on information that we're capturing in the document. So that's our document status codes. So the first thing that I see partners and clients struggle with is making sure that we identify the right vendor in the system when a new document comes in. They always have that question: how did Continia find this vendor? Why is it selecting this vendor? So something that I always teach partners and clients to do when they're starting out is personalizing their page and adding a field to the document journal. There's a field in the document journal called identified by. So I always suggest that partners and clients personalize a page and add this field identified by and add it after this field called search text. The identified by field shows you how did Continia by default find this vendor and assign this template. And as you can see, we're using those identification fields that I showed you previously within the document category. We found a name, we found an address, we found a city when we scanned the document, and we made that match to the existing vendor within the system that matched that criteria. Remember, within the document category, you can hit the 3 dots, go to edit, go to identification fields, and potentially change the criteria we look for. So if there's something else that is going to be the driver to match those vendors, maybe you want to change the ratings. Maybe you want to remove some of these fields from the identification fields. So the identified by field allows you to find out how did we find the vendor by default. If it's incorrect, you want to go to the vendor and choose the right vendor in the system. So if you've found the wrong vendor by default through those identification fields, you want to go into vendor and then choose the right vendor. After you choose the right vendor, we're going to add what is known as a search text. A search text is a unique identifier that's taken directly from the document that will bypass this system identification fields and matching logic. So an search text is taken from the first page. So while identification fields are searching all pages and trying to make those matches, a search text is only looking at the first page of a particular document to find a unique identifier. When I'm teaching partners and clients with creating search texts, I always suggest to use numbers, account numbers, bank account numbers, customer numbers. Phone numbers are good as well. Even email accounts are good as well because they don't have any spaces and most times that they're unique. So in this example, I'm going to review the first page. And if you look at the bottom, it says, please pay to our bank account. So I'm going to capture this bank account number as our unique search text. I'm going to click into the search text field to pull up the cursor, and I'm going to do a left click and drag of the mouse over the value that I want to capture as a search text. So using document capture and using the journal, it's very important to use a mouse because we'll do a lot of left clicks and right clicks of the mouse. So left clicks to create blue boxes are for the values that you want to capture. So I've captured the bank account number as my search text with a left click and drag of the mouse to create a blue box. And if you want to test, am I picking up the search text correctly? You can go to the vendor, delete the vendor, and hit tab. Now we only know this document is document 1. We don't know the vendor, we don't know the template. There's a function called home and recognize fields. The recognize fields function is the refresh function or the update function. So when you run recognize fields, it's going to refresh and update the document. So I'll recognize fields. And as you can see, we found the vendor, found the template, and now that identified by field has been updated, we are now identifying this vendor by the search text. So that's why it's very important that since you're just starting out, I want you to add the field identified by to the document journal after your search text so you can confirm, is my search text working, or how am I identifying this vendor by default? Am I using identification fields, or could I be using our search text instead? And we can go to the next document. This is for the same vendor. So I'll delete the vendor, hit tab, run the recognize fields to update the document. And you can see that this document is now being identified by the search text and is applying template 1 for that vendor. Same thing, delete the vendor, hit tab. We only know this document is document 3. Recognize fields to update, and we're now identifying it by the search text. So I want to make sure that you're getting into the habit of exposing this field and building search text for your vendors. It's very important. This is a lot of times clients come into, trouble because let's say also, right? Let's say that there may be one vendor, but your client might have multiple templates for the same vendor, right? That can be the case. Maybe for the same vendor, they process them differently. So one template is set up to process one way, another template is set up to process a different way. So we can do that in different ways. Let's go to these two documents that I imported. So right now, this is a document. We don't know the vendor. So within the document journal, if we are not able to find the vendor, there's a cool function that you can take advantage of to create a vendor. So if your client doesn't have a vendor in the system already, you can create a vendor. It will pull up a wizard and it will scan the document and fill in some information for us to create a vendor for us. And it will use a template if a template exists. So we're going to use this wizard to create one of our vendors in the system. Okay, so we have the farming vendor that we've created. And you can see that this is another vendor for farming. And let's just recognize fields. So this is saying that, hey, that second vendor, we were founded by the name, which is the company name, and the address. And we use that identification fields to find that vendor. But let's say each of these documents want to process differently. So we're going to configure the first search text for this vendor, right? And, let's say we use the build to name or the build to number as our search text. So I'll click into here. I'll do a left click and drag over the value of our build to number. We'll test our search text by removing the vendor, hitting tab. And if we recognize fields, you can see that we're now finding this vendor by the unique search text. But let's say for this second document, we still wanted to find the same vendor, but maybe we want a different template. So we want to create a brand new template for farming. So if you want to create a brand new template, you'll go to Actions, Functions, Create Select Template, and we'll create template. Do we want to copy the existing template or do we want to create a brand new template that's based on the master template? I'll go to Create New because we're not going to just copy the same template that you already created. We're going to create a brand new one. Now we have template 6. Now, this time we still wanted to find the same vendor, but now we wanted to route to template 6 instead of template 5. So we're going to use this and create multiple search texts for this vendor, because not only are we going to use the first search text to find the vendor, we're going to use a second search text to find the appropriate template. So here, I'm still going to capture the build to number as the first search text. But now, if we zoom in a little bit, maybe I want to capture the reference number as my second search text. So you want to remember what it is, and we're going to open up search text, and we're going to type in what our second search text for this individual particular template will be. I'm going to use that reference number. I'm going to say 172.493.455. So when you're using multiple search texts, that's why it's important to use multiple lines, because in a search text, if everything is on one line, we consider spaces as this or that statements. So this is saying, let's just say I put in farming. So because there's a space within the one line, this search text says to find this template, it has to say this number or farming. So spaces within the same line of a search text is a this or that statement. But an entirely new line is an and statement with search text. So because we had a second line on our search text, this is saying for this template, it has to say the first search text and it has to say the second search text in order for us to find this particular template. So while the first template is only routing based on the build to address, the second template is saying not only does it have to say the build to name number, but it also has to say the unique reference number to route to this template. And now if we go back to the vendor, so now you can see there's only one search text on the template 5, but there's two search texts on template 6. So now if we remove the vendor and hit tab, now we only know the document is document 15. If we recognize fields, it's still found template 5, most likely because it still exists. We need more search text here. So let's go back to template 6. It probably found that number somewhere. I'm going to add another search text. So not only does it have to say the first one, it also has to say the second one. I'm also going to say it has to say the sold to number of 897654. So I'm going to do 897654. So this is saying for this search text, it has to include all three numbers on the document. And if I delete the vendor, hit tab, and recognize fields, you now see that it found template 6 because it found all three of our unique search text. So you might run into situations, it has to be unique, right? As you saw, 2 search text wasn't enough because the numbers appeared somewhere on the document that is assigned template 5. So your search text definitely has to be unique to that document, to that template, in order for us to route it appropriately. And you always want to create new lines. I do not want all of these numbers on the same line because it's an or statement. If all three of these numbers were on the same line, it would have said it has to see this number or that number or this number. New lines mean all three of these numbers have to be present in order for us to match to template 6. So let's drop our yes or no into the chat if we can understand what search texts are, how to identify using the new field identified by to see how are we finding the vendor, and the reasons why, if you're using multiple templates, you need multiple lines in the search text in order to appropriately route to the right vendor and the right template. And multiple lines mean and statements. Same lines are or statements. Okay. So I want you to practice. So a part of your practice after this session, if you have documents exposed, identified by to your document journal, start to create search text, start to configure and test, are we routing to the right vendor and the right template? So if we're just exploring the document journal, again, we have the registration. So after a document has been set up, you want to register the document to create the purchase invoice. The recognize fields is the update or refresh function in the document journal. We have this field called match lines. So we'll revisit this when we talk about purchase order matching, but this field is used as kind of like an overview screen so that you can see the open orders and the open sheets that may be present for a particular vendor. So this is a unique list for only this vendor, and this will show the open receipts and open orders for that vendor. And we use this field to confirm that we're matching appropriately. And if your client has a need to manually match to particular receipts or order lines, we would do manual matching within the match lines screen. You have the ability to register these documents in batches. So you can select multiple documents. And if these documents are marked as okay, you can register the batch to register multiple. Okay. We have the document. We'll use the document card when it comes to capturing line detail. So the document card is used to capture lines, and we'll talk about that in a future session. If you want to pull up the PDF file, you can go to document PDF file and view the PDF. You can view the incoming email from the vendor. If you want to pull the incoming email, that'll pull the incoming email. If you want to add additional attachments, you can add additional attachments to drag and drop. Let's say you've imported the document to the wrong category. You can change the document category that the document is associated with. So maybe I imported into purchase, but I really want to import it to purchase orders. I can change the document category that a document is assigned to directly from the document journal. You can manually split and merge documents together. So in the case that a vendor sends in one file, but within that one file, there might be multiple invoices in that one file, and you decided not to turn on the automatic splitting. Remember, yesterday we showed you how you can implement automatic splitting of those documents when you import them. You always have the ability to manually split from the document journal. So you can come here, you'll see your documents list. You can take a particular page and say, hey, this page 2 is actually a brand new invoice. So I can just take that and split it from document 14 to create a brand new document. Or you can take multiple documents and merge them together into one document. So within the split and merge page, you can manually split documents from each other, or you can manually merge documents together into one document. We use comments a lot too. So documents could also have comments associated to it. So this is a kind of a way that you can communicate internally with your AP users by adding comments to the document. And we also use comments in place where you can assign documents to users within BC. So let's say that, for this particular document, I want to add a comment that, say like, all right, this document needs a PO, right? And then I'm going to assign this document maybe to the person responsible for purchase orders internally. So if they're set up as a Continia user, you'll see them in this list. You can assign that document to that person and add a comment to that document. And then when that user logs in, inside of the role center, there's a role tile that says the documents assigned to me for that particular user. I'm signed in as that user in BC. I see the role tile, and you can see the documents that are assigned to them. And you can see the document, and you can see the comments associated with that documents. So a way that your clients can manage documents is adding comments and then assigning those documents to users within BC, which is another way to manage documents. And as you can see, right, we have those customizable columns that are starting to be populated. When you run the recognized fields, we're capturing data. So we have the due date, we have the amount, including tax or a grand total, and this can be used to sort. Hey, so you can sort to say, hey, I only care about processing the high dollar amount documents. So I want to sort on the grand total, or I only want to focus on the due dates that are coming up. So I want to sort my documents based on the due date, or you can just sort the documents based on the document number, okay? You can go to the vendor card by going to vendor card. So this will pull up the associated vendor card for this vendor, right? And then we have certain actions here. So we have the registration actions. The BC admin could have the responsibility or the ability to force register a document. So let's say that, they don't care about the errors, they don't care about the warnings. Maybe they just want to force the registration of the document. Whoever is assigned as the administrator inside of Continia would have the ability to force register a document. And remember, these are just the other actions from the home screen. You can reject a document, and this will just go to the rejection list. Here's some other features. Validation of the fields. So this is kind of like a light use of the recognized fields. So let's say that your client is inputting data manually. When you run a recognize fields, it will remove anything that has been captured manually. But if you want to keep the valid values that have been captured manually, but you still want to run that validation, you can go to actions, functions, validate, and this will just check if the template could be registered, and it will keep those manually entered values. Remember that create select template is that a function that I would use if you want to create a brand new template. You can create new, which would create a new template from the master. That's the create select template. We talked about match lines. We talked about the document card. And then if you want to add a new template field, you can add that field to the template. So if you go to template, add template field, this will pull up all of the available fields from the master template. That's why I said it is not recommended to delete fields from the master template, because you'll never know when your client may have use for it. So these are all of the fields from the master template that are available to add at the individual template level. Okay. You can also create a new template field specifically for this template. So creating a new template field will pull up a wizard. You can click next. It could be either a header field or a line field, and it could be either a number field. You can create a dimension field, a lookup field, or just a plain text field. So you can use this wizard to create a brand new field specifically for this particular template. Remember, we're only at template 1 for document 1. So creating this new template field would only make it available for template 1. If you wanted to create a new template field and make it available for all templates, I would suggest you go to the purchase document category and you go to the master template and you create that new template field on the master template. You would go to create template field if you want to create it using the wizard, or you would just choose new to create it from scratch using the header card, either header or line, and then you would just configure the settings that way. Okay. There's a function on the master template that I want to show you. Let's say you have a particular field. Maybe there's a particular field. There's a function called copy field. So let's say you've configured the master template. Your client is starting to create individual vendor templates. They may have created several already. And they come to you and they say, hey, actually, there's a particular field from the master template that we forgot to add that we actually want to make available for all of our individual vendor templates. You can go to the master template field, find a particular field in question, and choose this copy field function. So copying the field will take that field and add it to every existing vendor template where that field doesn't already exist. So there is a way to kind of mass add template fields from the master to your existing templates as long as that template field doesn't exist already. So the copy field function is a good way that you could sort of mass update templates. Okay. So I'm going to launch a poll. So I just launched a poll. The question is, how do you find out how a vendor template was chosen? Okay. So the question was, how do you find out how a particular vendor or a particular template was chosen? The potential answers were open the template card, expose the identified by field, open document categories, or go to the vendor card. The answer was expose the identified by field. So remember, you'll have to personalize your page. I suggest that you add it after your search text so that you can see if the search text is working appropriately. But that identified by field is your field to reference what is the system doing? How is the system finding the vendor and then finding the template? I'm going to launch another poll now. So the next poll question is, what is not a way to manage documents within the document journal? Okay. So the question was, what is not a way to manage documents in the document journal? The potential answers were identification fields, document status codes, customizable columns, or the assigned to user ID field. The answer was identification fields. So if you remember, identification fields are used to identify the vendor and identify the template, right? It is not how you can potentially communicate internally or manage documents within the document journal itself, right? So I showed you those status codes that you can create, and status codes is a way that you can manage documents because your client could create different types of status codes and assign a particular status code to a particular document, and based on their internal processes, they can say, like, to us, a particular status codes means this to our organization. So that's a way to manage documents. Remember those, those customizable columns is a way to manage documents to say, like, hey, I want to sort and filter based on due date, or I want to sort my documents based on the amount. So that's a way to manage documents. And then remember, we talked about, comments and assigning documents to users so that you are able to manage documents and communicate internally, adding comments to documents, and then, you know, assigning responsibility to people that are set up with Continia to, communicate and maybe have them do different things for a particular document. So the answer was identification fields. We do not use identification fields to actually like manage documents. It's more so kind of like identifying vendors and identifying templates. So that was the answer. Okay. So to recap what the document journal is, we kind of like talked about the master template as well. We showed you the document list, how you can use customizable columns, document status codes. What are we using for vendor identification, right? Remember, by default, we're going to use those identification fields. We're scanning every page of the document and we're trying to make matches based on certain criteria within that identification fields list and the ratings that you're assigning to those fields. You always have the ability to filter the source table, like I showed you yesterday, or you can exclude sources from being used in Continia. So if there's certain vendors that you do not want to process, like internal vendors, blocked vendors, you can add them to the excluded sources list. And at the end of the day, we want you to get into the habit of creating a unique search text for every single vendor template. The search text overwrites identification fields. All right. It's a unique identifier taken from the first page of the document. Remember, it's only the first page. So while identification fields are reviewing every page and trying to make a match, the search text is only looking at the first page and making a match. And we want to make sure that you're using unique numbers without any spaces. I showed you how, everything on the same line is a this or that statement. A brand new line is an and statement. So in the case where you might have similar vendors, maybe you have the same vendor, but you have multiple templates, utilize search text and create new lines in the search text to route it and make sure that you're finding the right template because it has to meet all of that criteria for each line of the search text. And remember, we like to use numbers, account numbers, customer numbers, bank account numbers, email addresses, phone numbers. We talked about the identify by field that you have to personalize it, and we want you to add it after the search text. And then, here are some of the key functions and the key actions within the document journal that you'll see in future sessions that we'll be using most often, especially the recognized fields, because we'll be utilizing it to update the register function because we always want to, register documents. We talked about adding and removing template fields. You're able to add fields from the master or remove template fields from the individual template. We talked about, the document card and the max lines page. We won't revisit these pages until we have the relevant session when we talk about configuration about those two areas. But we have the template card, splitting and merging, and how you can pull up the PDF file and the email. Okay. So that brings us to the end of today's session. We talked about the master template structure and we went through the master template. So every time you have a new project, we always suggest before you get started, go through the master template, configure those fields, and make sure that you're only exposing what the client needs to have to handle the majority of their incoming vendor invoices. And today I kind of showed you the best practices, the most frequent fields that we go through at Continia North America for US clients and the considerations for those. And then we also talked about vendor identification and how to configure and create those search tags and what to do to troubleshoot and make sure that we find the right vendor and we find the right template.